Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Young, and I serve as the coordinator of sorority fraternity life here at Loyola University Chicago in the Center for Student Engagement. So, for today's student organization orientation for presidents, we'll be talking a little bit about some highlighted policies. So, let's get started. So first, just know student organizations are required to follow all policies outlined in the handbook as well as community standards. Those policies are shared in the organization handbook, and so these next few slides will talk about a few highlighted policies. So please make sure to browse the handbook for a full list of policies with detailed explanations. It is also hyperlinked in the presentation to find the community standards as well as the student organization handbook. So first, let's start with the alcohol policy. So first, all student organizations are subject to regulations concerning alcohol when hosting sponsor events on or off campus. So that includes any event an observer would associate with the student organization. So here are the guidelines as follows. No student activity funds or organizational funds can be used to purchase alcohol. Hosting fundraising events with alcohol are prohibited. No student org shall sell alcoholic beverages. Costs of alcoholic beverages cannot be included in admission charge. No student org can collect a fee or charge, which entitles a guest to alcohol, and the alcoholic beverages cannot be used as a prize. In addition, events with alcohol must be closed events, so that guest list must be submitted 3 days prior to the event. Sorority Fraternity Life organizations must submit all required information via activity request form. And then when it comes to your sober representatives, you need to have 2 + 1 sober representative for every 20 guests. And so that information needs to be submitted to CSC 3 days prior to the event. Orgs are prohibited from selling/providing alcohol to minors, and the organizations must take precautions with underage consumption by having a third party check attendee identification. And then lastly, sponsorship by businesses that sell or distribute alcohol is prohibited. Alcohol is prohibited at new member or recruitment activities. Alcohol cannot be the reason or focal point of the event. And then food and non-alcoholic beverages must be provided free of charge at the event. And all events with alcohol must occur at a third-party vendor, and that alcohol must be served by a licensed third-party vendor. Now let's talk about the Good Samaritan policy. So, what is the policy? So, in an event of a crisis or medical emergency, we expect loyal students to care not only for themselves but for others, and by getting help from the appropriate officials. So, this policy was really created to reduce barriers in seeking help for emergency assistance, as fear disciplinary action could lead to request. And so, if you want more information, please reference the Safety Net website with more information about the Good Samaritan policy. So let's talk a little bit more about events with risk and vulnerable populations. So, what consists of an event with risk? So that any event that includes physical activity or provided transportation/travel, if it's an event at an off-campus location with contracts, and then if it includes minors and older adults. So, for events with physical activity, that could be dancing, sports related activities, soccer, basketball, football, you name it. Any activity that could constitute strenuous movement of participants. So, ARS for these events should be submitted 14 days prior to the event. And just know when submitting these events, all participants will need to have a general liability waiver submitted to CSE at least 24 hours prior to the event. So, it can be emailed to the activities email or dropped off at the CSE office. Now, in terms of transportation and travel, so for events in which transportation is provided, please see what's outlined here. So first, we'll talk about your personal car. The driver will need to fill out a driver agreement form and obtain a glove box accident form, and then all riders will need to submit a general liability waiver 24 hours prior to departure. And if you are going through a rented vehicle, so that could be a bus, car, then you would need to provide the vendor contract and certificate of liabilities insurance 4 weeks in advance. So that has to be a signed Loyola vendor contract, as well as if they have their own vendor contract as well. For Loyola rented vehicles, you will need to fill out a vehicle rental request form, complete defensive driving course, a driver agreement form, and annual motor vehicle records check, and then also obtained a copy of glove box accident form. So these are also hyperlinked in the handbook as well. So any events with travel, when traveling over 100 miles from Lakeshore, you need to make sure you submit an activity request 2 weeks in advance of the event. All participants need to still submit a general liability waiver to our office at least 48 hours in advance. And if your event has overnight travel, then there are some additional items as well. So you need an advisor and Loyola employee that will need to be present. A charter bus will need to be contracted if you're traveling off campus. A contract with the venue will need to be submitted if you're utilizing a venue off campus. A roster will need to be submitted 48 hours prior to the event, and general liability waivers for all participants will need to be submitted as well. And so when it comes to events with off-campus locations, so any organization that has an event with off-campus location should submit a roster of attendees, liability waivers if you're providing transportation, and then activities that are taking place at the event. If you are contracting off-campus venues for the event, you will need to submit a contract at least 4 weeks in advance with the venue certificate of liability insurance. If food is being provided at the venue, please outline what is being provided. And then if this is an event with alcohol, a liquor license will also need to be provided in addition to the contract and certificate of liability insurance, as well as additional documentation. So let's talk a little bit about events with vulnerable populations. So for events with minors, if it's for an off-campus event, you do have to partner with an external nonprofit childcare facility. And so this external org must provide proper training, which includes for the involved students, as well as background checks for the venue, background checks. They must provide the venue and then comprehensive supervision. And then an activity request form and a liability waiver will still need to be submitted for approval. Now, if this is an on-campus event, organizations do have to partner with the Loyola University Chicago affiliated department that will supervise the event. So parents or guardians must be present, and ARF and liability form still need to be submitted for this as well. And then there's more information here where you can look about for the policy on the protection of minors. So now for events with older adults, if it's an off-campus event, student orgs must partner with an external care facility for older adults. So those are individuals over the age of 65. That external organization must provide the proper training with involved students, background checks, the venue, and comprehensive supervision. And that activity request form and liability waiver will still need to be submitted for approval. So now let's talk about fundraising. So all student organizations, whether you are funded by student activity funds or the department, can raise funds for two purposes. So that's your internal organization operations and then philanthropic purposes. So organizations that use student activity funds to support an event must have all revenue donated directly to the nonprofit organization. And then any fundraising events that have an admission fee for attendance should be lower for Loyola students than admissions fees set for attendees outside of the university. And then all fundraising events on campus or off campus should have an approved activity request form on file with CSE prior to collecting money. Something to note with approvals. So if you do plan to do an online fundraiser for a charity or a nonprofit organization, there are certain guidelines. So first, the charity and nonprofit organization needs to provide an online portal for fundraising. So those funds must go directly to the organization. Students must not have access to those funds. Your donation pages must not include LUC logo, crest, or any other trademarks. The organization is consistent with LUC's mission, and then the request is approved by a CSE staff prior to engaging in fundraising. So just one thing to note with getting approval, the link to the online fundraising website of the organization that you're doing the fundraising for must be submitted to CSE for review and approval via the activity request form. So as a reminder, ARS must be submitted at least 14 days prior to fundraising, and that completed request will be sent to the appropriate CSE staff member for review and can be approved or denied. So something to note about on-campus fundraising methods, the following methods are are permitted on campus. So that includes selling items, so that's like donated items or food. Just note if you are selling food, you will need to provide a certificate of liability insurance and health inspection, especially if this is a non-preferred vendor. Any rummage sales, charging admission in the form of ticket sales. So just know if this is an event funded by student activity funds, proceeds can only be used to support the charitable organization, and if you're asking for monetary donations. These methods are prohibited. So you cannot fundraise for political campaign solicitations and fundraising activities, raffles and lotteries, events or activities promoting and or providing alcohol, eating contests, and date auctions. So in terms of receiving funds, that can be done via cash, checks written to Loyola University account, and just Loyola University Chicago, and those funds will remain within the Loyola account and checks written to the not-for-profit organization. Please, please, please know, receiving funds cannot be done via online money transfer method. So that is Chase Quick Pay, Zelle, Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. So please note, please do not receive funds for your fundraisers via, again, Quick Pay, Zelle, Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal. So let's talk about food distribution and what your organization should know. So, one thing to note, home prepared foods of any kind are prohibited for sale and distribution. So, that's any food made in the residence halls. When catering food to the university community, we encourage organizations to use Airmark. So, some guidelines are that food must be individually wrapped and grab and go format. So, that can be they can be purchased or donated by a preferred vendor. Just know for baked goods, they must be prepackaged and single serve as well. Only store-bought items can be sold or distributed. So just know student organizations cannot purchase bottled water with student activity funds or private venue funds, so revenue funds. So you essentially must connect with Airmark to provide water at events. So for food handling, just know no eating, drinking, or smoking is allowed during that process. Please make sure to wash your hands before resuming food handling. And just know current Loyola students must be the individuals responsible for the distribution of the food items. And that's pretty much it in terms of the information for our highlighted policies. So if you have any feedback or suggestions, please make sure to fill out this feedback form. Just know this form will confirm your attendance for the session. So if you have any questions, please reach out to our office at activities@luc.edu. Thank you and go Redlers.